take the bottom note, actually let's start an octave lower. We take our bottom note and we move it up an octave. So there's our G chord in first inversion, B, D, G. And if we invert it again, we do the same formula. Take the bottom note, bring it up an octave. There's our new shape. There is second inversion G major. Hello everyone, and welcome to another Playground Sessions live lesson here on our YouTube channel. Thank you so much for joining me. I want to first apologize and say it's been a week or two since we've gone live, and I want to tell you that that's because we've been up to a whole lot of great stuff here in our production studio. I'm going to tell you more about that in a little bit, but I'm excited today because we're going to be talking about a topic you guys voted on. Before, though, we get into today's topic, I want to briefly remind you guys, for those of you who are willing, we've got a brief survey that I want to ask everybody to participate in at some point during or ideally after this lesson. It's just going to be a couple of questions that ask you what you think of the lessons and if you have any ideas for things that we could do better. We're just basically polling you guys to see if we can learn from your feedback. So I'm going to have my trusty not assistant, he's really my peer here. Aiden and I both are putting all this together for you guys. I'm going to have him post a link in the comments here to the survey. So just a bit of housekeeping there. Open that in a new tab, and please, if you have a minute after the lesson, do us a favor and fill that out. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about the topic you voted on. I put out there chords. What do you guys want to talk about with chords? Should we keep it as a beginner level, an intermediate level, or an advanced level lesson on chords? And you guys voted. So today we're talking about chords. It was pretty much split between beginner and intermediate. So I'm going to go ahead and give you a hybrid lesson today. We're talking chords, rookie/intermediate level, okay? Now, I mentioned just a minute ago that we made some awesome stuff last week, right? We had the honor of having none other than David Bowie's keyboardist. This guy is amazing. His name is Mike Garson, and we had him in the studio recording a whole bunch of stuff. And I want to just show you guys a quick clip, just a preview of how great this guy is. Obviously, Bowie wasn't a jazz player, but Mike Garson has an incredible set of jazz skills, independent of his time with Bowie. This is just Mike jamming a little bit at the jazz club on none other than our very own Playground Sessions keyboard. So I'm going to just send you to a quick clip and get you inspired by Bowie's keyboardist Mike Garson. I'll see you on the other end. What? Mike Garson is a beast. We shot so much stuff with him. I can't wait to roll this stuff out over the coming months. But that was a fun time. We did that all last week, and so we had to skip our live lesson. Although I learned that David Sides went live on the Facebook group instead, so that was cool. So, guys, keep an eye out for all the great content we've been producing. For now, though, let's go ahead and get into this lesson. We're going to be talking about chords. First, though, I lied. First, let's talk about your guys' questions and comments. Then we'll get into this lesson because I see a lot of activity. I just want to say hey to you guys who joined from the beginning. First of all, Aiden Merrill, hey, thanks for writing. You were our first couple of comments today. and you wrote some good stuff, so I'm going to address that in just a bit. Thank you for writing in. David Violante, how you doing, man? Nice to see you again. Glad you made it. Michelle is writing, this is their first lesson, it seems, with Playground. My French is pretty poor, guys, so sorry. But that's pretty sweet. We got people writing in from around the world in their own languages. Hey, Michelle, thank you for hanging out. I hope you can follow along despite my lesson being in English. Music is the universal language, though, right? Bonjour. John Sandlin, how you doing? Good to see you as always. Lynn, hi. Thanks for joining us. Deborah Ann. Deborah from Oak Lawn, Illinois. Great to see you. Thanks for hanging out. Stephanie Kroll. Hello, everyone. I love your live lessons, Phil. Thank you, Stephanie. Thanks for hanging out. I hope you'll do that survey afterwards and give us some positive results. Donna, hello, hello. Douglas, hello. All right. Jose. Man, you guys are writing faster than I can keep up. So this is exciting. Hey, John says, hey, that's a PG 150 piano. So you must be talking about the video of Mike Garson playing. He was on our Playground keyboard. So cool, right? It sounded great. And just watching him play so virtuosically on it was really inspiring as well. I love seeing the Playground keyboard really get taken to its full capabilities like that. All right. I see Anne Claire writing from Quebec. Hey, we are crossing borders today. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump in. Throughout this lesson, guys, please write more questions and comments. I'll be checking in throughout. But let's get started. I want to play some chords for you guys. Okay? That's what we're doing. So, chords. The first thing I want to talk about are the basics with chords. We're going to talk about the main triads that we typically see when we're talking about chords at the beginner and intermediate level. So we're going to do a bit of an outlining of the basics. This may be a review for some of you guys, but I promise as we go through today's lesson, things are going to get a bit harder and harder. So first we got to talk about major and minor triads, obviously. A triad is a 3-note chord. Here's one, C major chord. Now, a major chord and a minor chord are really only have one note that differentiates them. Okay, we have a C major triad. That's the 1-3-5 of the C major scale. And that's true for any chord, by the way. An A major chord is the 1-3-5 from the A major scale. There's our A major triad, okay? Minor, all we do is take that major triad and we flat the third. Now, I don't mean the third note of our chord, which would be 1, 2, 3. I mean the third scale degree. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the third is this note. And when we flat the third, we're bringing it down by 1/2 step. It doesn't matter that it's already a black key. That's something different than a flat. Okay, flat just means bring it down 1/2 step. So A major is this. A minor, we're going to flat the third to C. There's A minor. So if we go back to our C example, here's C major. C minor, we just what? Flat the third. So there's C minor. Major and minor triads. Let me actually take a step back and define something that I skipped over. Let me define chord. Okay, we're talking about triads as a 3-note chord, but a chord can really be much more loose and broad than that. A chord is really just any combination of 2 or more notes. It's a harmony. It's more than one note being played at the same time. So is this a chord? Technically, yeah. It's not my favorite chord. And it's not a triad. It's not a major chord or necessarily a pretty chord. But my point is, the definition means just joining 2 or more notes together. Now, we can narrow that down to a triad. That's specifically a 3-note chord, no more, no less. And we can then narrow from there down to a major triad, minor triad, right? Let's keep going. Those aren't the only 2 chords. Next up, one of our main triads we see is a dominant chord, okay? Now, this is a little misleading because in the triad form, a dominant chord is really just a major chord. So if we're in the key of C, 1 chord's major, we can keep walking up through our chords. The 5 chord is dominant. But again, when we only have 3 notes, or a triad, it's unclear whether this is a major chord or a dominant chord. When we add a 4th note to the chord, when we add a 7th scale degree, that's when we can start to talk about a true dominant 7th chord. We'll get to that in just a minute. For now, let's stick to triads. From there, we go to a chord some of you may have heard of if you've worked on our chords course in the app, the diminished chord. Now, this is the one that we always tend to skip over a bit, not just us. Anyone that's teaching piano in a way that is somewhat standard, typically we skip over that seventh chord until we're much more advanced, but I'm going to cover that today. One chord's major. We talked about 5 being dominant, 6. Here's the 7 chord is diminished. We always say, oh, that's the outlier, and then we move on. Well, let's talk a little bit more about the diminished chord today. In any major key, the chord built from the 7th scale degree is going to be a diminished chord by definition. Now, we talked about major and minor. Major is 1, 3, 5. Minor is 1, flat 3, 5. Diminished also has a formula. It's 1, flat 3, flat 5. So we're flatting 2 of our scale degrees from our major chord. And now we have this crunchier chord. The diminished chord is what you hear most often if you're watching maybe an old, silent, scary movie, for example. You're going to hear a lot of stuff like this. Diminished chords create a lot of tension. And what I was just doing was basically doubling the same chord. There's my diminished chord. I was putting it in the right hand too, and I was just kind of shaking it, which adds extra tension and agitation. Diminished chord is 1, flat 3, flat 5. You could also think about a diminished chord as being all intervals of minor thirds, or 3 half steps. So let's test that. Let's do a different one actually from C. Let's start on E. We're going to try to play an E diminished chord. So every interval is a minor third or 3 half steps. So 1, 2, 3, that's our next note. And then 1, 2, 3, that's our next note. There's an E diminished triad. How do we test this? Well, we know it's 1, flat 3, flat 5. So let's figure out what 1, 3, 5 is. That's E major, 1, 3, 5. So if we flat the third and we flat the fifth, that's what we get. And sure enough, that's what we got when we walked up by intervals of minor thirds. Diminished chords are super cool. They kind of act like pivot chords, and they can really help you change keys and transpose to another key. But since this is not an advanced lesson on chords, we're not going to get to that in today's lesson. I just wanted to tell you guys about the main sort of diminished triad and give you that formula. There's one more that I want to talk about that maybe we haven't talked about since it's not in our major scale 1 through 7 chord formula. And this is called an augmented triad. So we got major, we got minor, we got diminished, and we have augmented. Also sounds pretty tense and crunchy, right? And it is. This also has a formula that we can use. We can start with a major triad and then alter some of those notes. Major is 1, 3, 5. Diminished, we flatted the third and we flatted the fifth, right? Well, augmented is 1, 3, sharp 5. So we're going to take our major chord and we're going to sharp the fifth. Now this is called a C augmented triad. Another way to think about augmented triad is major chord with a sharp 5. This is literally, what it is. That's the formula. So let's go over these one more time. We got our hero chord, major, no alterations, 1, 3, 5. For minor, we want to flat the third, 1, flat 3, 5. For diminished, we also want to flat the fifth, 1, flat 3, flat 5. And for augmented, we want to go back to our major triad, 1, 3, sharp 5. So those are the main triads I want to talk about today. This is going to get you around quite a bit, especially at the rookie level, but even in the intermediate level with most songs that you're going to see. Now, where do we go from there? Well, the next step from triads is something that I hinted at when I talked about dominant 7th chords. 7th chords, okay? These are 4-note chords, not triads anymore. So if we're talking about 7th chords, we can add a 7th scale degree to every one of the triads we just did and get an expanded upon chord. Let me show you what I mean, okay? Here's our major chord. If we add the 7th scale degree, 1, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, that's what we get. And that is a C major 7 chord. It's a major triad with the natural 7 on top. No alterations. Now, when we go to a minor 7 chord, we already know how to do the minor triad, 1 flat 3 5, but we add the 7th. However, we don't want to add the natural 7. We're going to get to that in a bit because that's also a valid chord, but it's not what we want to talk about yet. A normal minor 7 chord is a minor triad with a flat 7. There it is. I love that chord too. A minor 7 chord. Minor triad with a flat 7. Okay, let's keep moving. What if we wanted to do a diminished 7, not a diminished triad? Well, that's a tricky one. The reason I say that is because if we continue to go up in minor third intervals, that's what we get for our 4-note chord for a diminished chord. Now, this is correct, but I wouldn't say that this is the 7th scale degree. This is more like the 6th. Now, this is a bit strange because technically we're double flatting our 7, but functionally speaking, it really is like the 6th scale degree. But regardless, for diminished chords that have 4 notes in them, I want you to just continue that minor third interval pattern and think about it like that. Because then you can invert that and it's all the same chord. Check it out. I'm just playing all minor third intervals moving up. It doesn't matter how many notes I play. It doesn't change the fact that it's a diminished chord. Okay, and then same goes for augmented triads. You could add a 7th to that as well. Really, there's more we can go from there, but I'd like to not overwhelm you today since we did vote on beginner and intermediate level. So I don't want to overload you here. I just want to talk about the final one, which is, I think, the most important, is dominant 7th, and I just skipped that one on accident. So I think we got to talk about this because we have something unique here. We have a major triad with a flat 7. So remember, I talked about major 7, major triad, natural 7. Talked about minor triad with a flat 7. For dominant 7 chords, we have a major triad with a flat 7. Any chord can be made into a dominant 7 chord. If you have a major chord, you add the flat 7. But if we're talking about something within the context of one key, we're in the key of C. The C chord's major, the D chord's minor. We know all this stuff. If we're looking at the chords in a key, there's only one chord that is dominant, and that's the 5 chord. So in the key of C, that would be a G7 chord. And here's why. These are the notes that we know we have to use based on our C major scale. There's no black keys in the C major scale, so as we're counting up through our scale degrees, we have the white keys to choose from. Now, if we analyze what we're doing here against the context of being in the key of G, where this would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that's a G major chord. But if we keep going and we see this F natural, well, in the key of G, the key signature tells us Fs are sharp. So if I was going to play a G major 7 chord, it would have an F sharp in it because that's the natural 7 in the key of G. But because this note does not belong in the key signature of the key of C, we have to use this instead. And technically this is the flat 7 of G, isn't it? So we have here a major triad with a flat 7. That is the formula, or the definition, I should say, of a dominant 7th chord. I really want you guys to remember that. Major triad, flat 7. Okay? So those are the 4-note chords that I'd like to focus on today. I didn't want to forget about dominant 7ths. So, let's see here. I think it's probably time to check in with you guys. I've been seeing activity, which is awesome. So I'm seeing some questions come through. I'm going to take a quick peek and see if I can get some responses to you guys. Jose. Jose Batista says he's provided a great tip for you guys. Thank you, Jose. This is another great way of thinking about major chords and minor chords. This is something that we talk about in our boot camp as well in the app. but I'll go over it again here since you set me up beautifully, Jose. So when we're talking about major chords versus minor chords, we can also look at the intervals in between the notes, just like we did with that diminished chord. Remember? All minor thirds. So what Jose is pointing out is we have a 4-3 pattern for a major chord and a 3-4 pattern for minor chord. I don't want you to get confused with time signatures. That's not what I'm talking about. When we say 4-3, what I mean is 4 half steps and then 3 half steps. So if we start on C and we're building a major chord, we want to think 4-3. 4 half steps up, then 3 half steps up. So from C, we want to go 1, 2, 3, 4. And then from here, we want to go up 3. 1, 2, 3. And check that out. We got a C major chord. So if you're, maybe you know C major, but maybe you don't know how to play a G flat major chord, you can still use that same formula. So let's start on G flat. Go up by 4 half steps. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then go up by 3 half steps. 1, 2, 3. There's our G flat major chord. So you can build a major chord using that formula. Minor chord, you just flip it. So first you go up 3 half steps, then you go up 4 half steps. So we'll try it on C again, since I know you guys know C minor. So we'll go up 3. 1, 2, 3. Then from here we go up 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. There's our minor chord. So Jose, thank you for that. Great point, great tip. Many of you may prefer that method if you're building chords on your own. I love when you guys chip in and we have a community contribution going. Hey Laredo, how you doing? Are you writing in from Johannesburg again? You are. Thank you for joining us. Happy to have you here. Yvonne, hey, from the Great White North. Hey there. Pete Healing. Hey, Pete. Great to see you. Loving your lesson. Thank you. Okay, let's see if we can get a question in here. Here we go. David says, I was wondering what exactly is meant by slash chord. My understanding is that, for example, a C major chord, C in second inversion is written C over G, or C over G bass. Okay, so I'll continue. You have another follow-up, which reads C/G, but for me is C over G. Not sure if this is advanced stuff. So I'll tell you what, David, this does get a little more advanced talking about slash chords. So I'll just give you the quick, like 15-second explanation about slash chords. So you're talking about inversions. There's really 2 different kinds of slash chords we may see. One is what you've called out, an inversion, a C chord with a G in the bass. It's still a C chord, but we've got it in an inversion where G is in the bass. We write that as C/G, or correctly, as you said, C over G. But there's another kind of slash chord we may see, and that is when you see a note after the slash that's not actually in the chord. And in fact, this is a good segue. Our very first question came from Aiden Merrill, and Aiden says, Aiden's talking about a polychord, is a set of chords played together at the same time, like fractions. Polychords use a bar, C/D. So let's talk about Aiden's example of C/D. We're not talking about inversions anymore, because there is no D in this chord. So we can't put a D in the bass and invert it. There's no D. So this is a different kind of slash chord. This could either mean one of 2 things. A C triad, or chord in the right hand, in any inversion you want, and then a single note D in the bass. And that is completely no longer a C chord, okay? C over G is still a C chord, it's just in a different inversion. But C over D, now we have a bit of a D sus chord. Okay, that's what C over D signifies to me. The second thing it could mean is a C triad over a D triad. And that might look like this. That is a polychord, because we have 2 more or less unrelated chords being played together, one superimposed on top of the other. Now, if we analyze that chord, a C triad over a D triad, which I believe you attempted to do in the beginning here, and you called it an A minor 7, sharp 11, sharp 13, add 11. That's a mouthful, but this is not an easy chord to analyze. It could be that because you're calling out a lot of the same notes that are shared in that chord and in this chord. But because we have a D in the bass very firmly, a C chord over a D chord, I'm going to try to analyze this chord as if it's a D chord. So what would this be as a D chord? Well, there's D major. That would be the 2 or the 9 in D. So this is like a D add 2. Then we have a G. That would be the 4 or the 11 of this D chord. So it's like a D9 add 4. And then we have the flat 7 of the D chord up here. So short answer, Aiden, is yes, that's a polychord. I don't know that I'd call it the A minor chord you wrote. I may try to call it some sort of a D chord. But then we're getting into a lot of theory and analysis. So again, I'd love to talk about that stuff with you. But for now, for this lesson, I'm going to keep it more to rookie and intermediate. But great thoughts. I love that you guys are getting excited about this various chord stuff. Okay, let's see. One more and then we'll get back to our lesson. Yvonne says, what's the best way for beginners to learn chords? Do we pick our favorite type of music and learn chords used in it, like pop? This is a great question, and Yvonne, I'm going to spend some time on this answer because I feel like there might be a good amount of other people watching who are in your same position. Maybe you're more of a beginner and you're just, all this is over your head and you're thinking, guys, I just want to learn how to play a chord. How do I start on that? So briefly, I'll talk to you and all the other rookies here on the channel, and I would caution you to not jump right into a song. Now, I say that because typically a song has a chord progression. A chord progression is a series of chords in an order that gets repeated. So if you have a C chord and you're just playing C, that's not a progression. But a progression might be C to F to G, back to F, and then you repeat C, F, G, back to F. That's a chord progression. And I might add that that's one of the easier progressions, the 1-4-5 progression. But if you're a beginner with chords, that still is going to be pretty challenging for you. So I would encourage you to start first by playing something that is just one chord in the left hand. It may not be as exciting musically for you, but be patient, because what you're doing at this stage is building the physical skill, the muscle independence and muscle memory. You've got to do that first before you can get as musical as you want to be, okay? So it's a push and pull. You've got to put work in for the reward. And that's true for anything we're working on. Okay? But what I would encourage you to do is to pick a chord that's easy for your hand to play and work on a few things. We can do C major. First, you can go one finger at a time if it's hard for you to play them as a block chord all at once. But if you feel like you're ready to try that, there's a few things you should think about when you're playing block chords. One is you want to push all 3 notes down at the same time. May be tricky. You may instead get something more like this. Okay, so you want to work on making sure you're pushing all of them down at the same time. You don't want one to be super loud and one to be super quiet like this. No, it's actually hard for me to do. You want all 3 notes to be even. And just work on that. And then once you can do that well, try to play it in time. 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay? From there, I would encourage you, when you're really bored of this C chord, start to move up through the key of C. Because all of these chord shapes are the same. They're all white keys in the key of C. So we can go from the C chord to our D chord. Even if you don't know what to call that chord, if you don't know if it's major or minor or whatever, that's okay. Because for you beginners, you're working on the muscle aspect of this, the physical aspect. So you want to work on going from your first chord, moving it in the air, pushing it down on the next chord, also all at the same time with even volume, right? Then moving that up or back down. So from there, you can add your own difficulty level. And then you maybe want to add in some notes in the right hand, play either G or C, or play them at the same time. Those notes will work over any chord in the key of C in your left hand. So you could try stuff like this. Now move to your next chord. Right? Move to the next one. Back to our C chord. So now I'm actually getting into progressions type stuff. But I hope that helped for me to lay out for you how you could actually get to the point where you're working on progressions. First start with the chord, then move it up a little bit, and so on. Okay? So, great point. Why don't we take it from there and get back into our lesson? And I'll continue to encourage you guys to write more. We're going to be going for another little bit here, so I'm going to give you some more lesson stuff, and we'll probably have one more check-in on the questions and comments. So thank you guys for hanging and writing in. All right, at this point, I'd like to take what we have a little bit further, okay? This is definitely going to get into intermediate land, maybe even pushing the edge towards advanced land, okay? But bear with me. I'm going to make this accessible as I can for you guys. We're going to be talking about altered chords, all right? Altered chords are, maybe you can guess, essentially it's a chord that we are changing a note or two about it, right? So we've already done that with our triads. We had our major chord, and then we altered it to make a minor chord. Then we altered that to make a diminished chord, right? So, sure, we were altering chords then, but what we're going to do now is take those chords, already altered, and then we're going to add stuff to it, and then we're going to change some stuff, okay? This is a really cool way to take your chords to the next level. Now, the first one I'll talk about, I like this. I hinted at this earlier with my minor chord when we were adding sevenths. Remember I said you don't want to play the natural 7 because that's a crunch that we maybe don't want if we're trying to play a more minor sound. A minor 7 chord has that flat 7, but if we so choose to intentionally play this chord, we can, and it'll have a certain effect. It's another kind of suspenseful chord, kind of like our diminished chords from earlier. Those are diminished. Here's augmented. Dreamy and tense, right? So if we have our minor chord with a natural or major 7, we'll call that a minor major 7. That can be a really cool chord. And that's an altered minor chord. C minor major 7. Okay, now there's a handful of other things we can do with major and minor chords, like a major 7 plus 5. Things like that. But what I'd like to do really is talk about how we can alter dominant chords. Dominant chords are ones that we alter the most. And again, I'm just going to touch on this stuff because it's advanced. There's much more to do, but the two I want to focus on have to do with altering the 9th scale degree. Let's jump into C7. C7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, flat 7. So this is a C dominant 7 chord. And I'm going to alter our 9th scale degree. So the first chord I want to look at is a C dominant 7, flat 9. So our 9 would be this. D is our 9, or 2. And in fact, this is also a chord we might play. Would be a D9, a D dominant 7 with the 9. But we're going to alter that 9, and we're going to flat it. There is a chord you may have heard before, even if you didn't know what it was called. If we have a dominant 7 flat 9, it wants to resolve down by a half step. And it can be a really nice kind of minor sounding dominant chord that can lead us to a very major sounding major chord, a happy sounding major chord. So C7 with a flat 9 wants to resolve down from that D flat to a C of our F chord. So there's just a hint at one altered chord. Now, you can alter the 5th, the 3rd, the 13th, all sorts of other stuff. And again, we're not going to be covering that in today's lesson. But I do want to talk about a dominant 7 chord with a sharp 9. Okay? So let's take the same chord. Here's our flat 9. Here's our normal 9. If we want to sharp it, sure enough, we have this chord, this note. Now, this is an interesting one because this note is called a sharp 9 here in this example and in this chord symbol. But in fact, really, it's the flat 3rd, isn't it? So here we have a dominant chord with the major 3rd and the flat 3rd, the minor 3rd, on top. That's a big crunch. But when you put the whole chord together and fill in the rest of the notes, you can hear it come together a little bit more. And again, I'll show you this in context. It's just another way of sort of giving a crunchy, altered dominant sound to resolve to our major 1. Okay. Now, one thing I think maybe you'll be surprised to hear is that I think it was this chord that Jimi Hendrix uses in is it Purple Haze? That chord right there. Dominant 7, sharp 9. Let's analyze it. It's an E chord, an E7 sharp 9. So E, that means it's going to be an E dominant chord, which means E major with a flat 7. That would be the natural 7. There's the flat 7. So it's a dominant 7 chord with the sharp 9. Okay? Well, the 9 in the key of E is actually F sharp. So if we sharp that, that means bring it up a half step. There's our sharp 9. Or, remember, it's also our minor third. So here would be the technical spelling of this chord, E7 sharp 9. But I voiced it in a different way. I removed the B, that's the 5 of that chord. So I just had G sharp, D, and G, natural, and I put a low E down there. The important notes here are the root, of course, the third, the flat 7, and the sharp 9. So we can either have this B in there or not. Dominant 7, sharp 9. One of my favorite altered chords. Guys, we know a lot of chords now, even some altered chords. We know how to play them as block chords. We can play these chords. But what if we want to do more from here? Again, I don't want to get too advanced, but there is one other thing I want to talk about before we wrap up today's lesson. And that is, okay, you got a chord, you know how to play it. Now what do I do with it? Do I do this? Or do I do this? There's all sorts of rhythm and tricks and flair type things that we can do to our existing chords. Separate from altering them, whether it's a normal chord or an altered chord, we can add some flair. So that's the last thing I want to talk about. And in fact, one thing I want to do is jog your memory. One of our lessons in the boot camp that features Harry Connick Jr. as our teacher, Harry talks about this, and so I actually want him to kick this portion of our lesson off. He's going to teach you guys about country chords. This is one of our favorite lessons from Harry internally, and that's because you've got a chord like G major, but he tells you what you can do to it when you play it to make it sound more like a country type chord. It's super cool. So I'm going to have Harry show you that, and then I'm going to pick up where he left off and kind of dig in a little bit more. So here's Harry.
We can take the same chord. Let's say we use a G chord, a G major chord. Everybody should know kind of what that is now. Let's find our G on the piano, and let's play a major chord. So we know there's a major third and a fifth. There's a G chord. How do I take that chord and make it sound, let's say, country? Let's play some country. So here's what you can do. Instead of playing just a G chord, you can do a grace note, or if you want to get technical, a 2-3 resolution, which means, here's a grace note. A 2-3 means I'm playing the 2 and I'm going to the 3. That's all it is. It sounds really complicated, but it's not. So instead of playing the triad first, I'm going to put the 2 instead of the 3. And listen. That doesn't sound really like country music, but when I do this, I'm not so sure that sounds like country music either. But when you play it in a certain way, hear that? 2-3. It's a much different if I went, listen. If you listen to George Jones, they do that all over the place. The guy who really played that music better than anybody was Floyd Kramer.
Man, man, I can't get enough of those country chords. I love that. So again, Harry puts it pretty blunt, right? It's a G major chord. But if you do this little 2 to 3, we'll call it a 2 to 3 resolution or a suspended 2 to 3, just that little move right there can take your chord into a whole nother genre, which is pretty cool. So if you play it flat, it almost sounds like the Office theme or like just like a kind of a generic piano pop song. But when we add that 2 to 3 resolution, it really takes it to the next level, right? So that's our first thing I want to talk about with these chord tricks. Basically piggybacking off of Harry, 2 to 3, okay? Now, if we can do 2 to 3, what else could we do to delay getting to our intended chord? Well, let's figure it out. One thing I like to do is go from the flat 3 to the natural 3. It's very similar to what Harry showed, but it has a bit more of a bluesy feel. So if the 2 to 3 resolution is country, then I like to think of this flat third to natural third as blues. Check this out. It's the exact same progression that I just played with the country chords, but now all of a sudden we're playing blues, right? So that might look like this. Let's keep it on G. And you could use your 2 finger if you want, but I kind of like to just slide my 3rd finger off. Some people may say that's maybe not the proper way to do it, but it depends on which chord you're playing too, obviously. But this one works like that, so I'll slide my 3rd finger off. And even though this is a G major chord, you still can put that minor 3rd in there as long as you then resolve to the major 3rd. So you can see 2 to 3 is country, flat 3 to natural 3 is kind of bluesy, right? I like that. Okay, let's talk about another one. If we can go 2 to 3, if we can go flat 3 to natural 3, what about 4 to 3? Yeah, this is kind of the classic sus chord. When you hear someone say a suspended chord or a sus chord, if they don't specify whether it's a 2 to 3 or 4 to 3 or whatever, typically it's a 4 to 3. And what I like about this is that you can actually extend that suspension for longer. So in the country example and in the blues example, it was a very quick suspension. And we're immediately already at the chord. Right? Same thing with the blues one. With the 4 to 3 suspension, I kind of like delaying it a little longer. So I'm going to play you a little progression. And then I'm going to actually just hit the G major chord right away at the end. Then I'm going to do the same progression again, but I'll hit you with the 4 to 3 suspension on the G chord at the end. Tell me if you hear a difference. There's the G chord. Nice and final. When we rest on that. Now here it is with the 4 to 3 suspension at the end. So that was a bit dramatic, but my point is it literally extends that feeling of when you're going to resolve. So it's kind of the long form version of what Harry was doing. If you did what Harry did in the long form way, you might actually still get that feeling. Sure, so you could extend that resolution that way too. But I personally think the 4 to 3 does a better job of that. That 4 to 3, that's key. All right, so maybe the last thing I'll talk about in terms of flair is actually putting a new whole chord in there to toggle between. So I like to call this toggling between the 1 and 4 chords. But bear with me here because I do this all over one chord. Let me show you what I mean. Here's our C major chord. And let's say we're playing a song, it's just a bunch of C major chords. In fact, Yvonne, I told you earlier, just practice that C major chord over and over again, and it might get a little boring, right? So let's imagine that we're playing a song in the key of C that just has that C chord for a while, and we want to spice it up. Okay, it's just a big C chord. What I'm doing here is kind of adding some rhythms between the fingers. But after a while, it's like, there's only 3 notes I can be using here, C, E, or G, right? So if I want to do something kind of like my 2-3 resolution or my 4-3 resolution, I could. That helps a little bit, right? But let me get to my point here. Toggling between the 1 and 4 chords of that chord can be a really fun way to extend this. In the key of C, the 1 chord is C, the 4 chord is F, then you go back to the 1. So you can genuinely do that over the C chord. I'm literally playing C to F to C. So if I'm playing a piece of music that says, here's a C chord symbol, just play a C chord for a while, I might actually do that. I might go... If I go to the F chord, I could still do the same thing here. What's the 1 and the 4 of F? Well, that would be F to B flat. So I could do that here too. F, B flat. Back to C, C, F, C, F. See what I'm saying? So that does have kind of a shuffly blues feel, but you don't have to do it swinging like that, and you don't have to do it so bluesy. The key here is that you could actually create your own mini progression to put over just 1 chord. And you can see a lot more advanced examples of this too. If I go to the C to the F chord, instead of doing this, 1, 2, 3, 4 to F, I might do this instead. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then I'm at the F. There's all sorts of stuff you can do, but this is the seed of the idea, is that you can take 1 chord and impose something like 2 or 3 or 4 chords as a progression on top of that. And it just adds a lot more momentum and motion to whatever it is that you're doing. Guys, that's about it for the lesson, but I want to just answer one more question before we get out of here. I saw it fly through. Somebody just said, hey, talk about negative harmony, thanks. No, that's the opposite of a beginner level lesson. Okay, where was it? I thought I saw one. Douglas says, hey, a bit of Floyd Kramer, cool. Yeah, that was one of Harry's heroes, one of his favorites as he was growing up. Worth checking out for sure. Okay, maybe I misspoke, guys. I thought I saw a question come through that was specifically about these chords. Since we're running a bit low on time today, I think we're going to leave it here. But please, as always, leave questions on any of my videos here on the channel for a chance to be responded to in a future lesson or in some of our Q&A videos, which we'll continue to produce as well. I don't want you guys to feel like your voices aren't being heard, but of course we're limited with time. So what I'd like to do actually now is just briefly give you a couple of what's news around the channel. We finished our challenge on Cole Porter. No, excuse me. We finished our challenge on I believe it was the classical stuff, where the winner, the prize was to have that one-on-one lesson with me. And so Mark Briggs is one of our users. He won the challenge, and we had a really fun lesson. So we're going to look to do more of that stuff in the future, more one-on-one lessons. What else? We have the Cole Porter Challenge, which we've done to support Harry Connick's new album. You guys have to check that one out if you haven't heard it yet. Cole Porter is one of Harry's sort of early entries into the Great American Songbook, so he's paying tribute to Cole Porter with this album. It's pretty awesome. And I guess that's about it. We're getting into the holidays, so keep your eyes and ears peeled for some Christmas stuff, some holiday music, as well as some sacred stuff and hymnal type stuff. we're going to be ushering in the holiday season before you know it. We've also got the rest of our, the next few at least, live lesson dates picked. So if you guys want to go over to our Facebook community, join the event for Playground Sessions YouTube live lessons. It's a Facebook event that has multiple dates booked out that you can put in your calendar. And also, if you join the event, you're going to get messages from us that remind you as well. So if you want to stay up to date on the next live lessons and you don't want to miss them, I would encourage you to join the Facebook group and go ahead and join that event. Let's leave it there, guys. I'm Phil. I'm dressed up because I have a gig I'm going to be going to right from here. I'm playing background jazz music at a beautiful club here in Akron, Ohio. If anybody's in the area, come on out to Blue Plate. Otherwise, I'm going to just play you guys out. I'm Phil. I'll see you guys soon for the next live lesson. We take the bottom note, actually let's start an octave lower. We take our bottom note and we move it up an octave. So there's our G chord in first inversion, B, D, G. And if we invert it again, we do the same formula. Take the bottom note, bring it up an octave. There's our new shape. There is second inversion, G major.